For me, this is a very unique opportunity. Like Joanne had mentioned, when we had discussed talking, or what this artist talk would be like in conjunction with the show, I really wanted to do something that was specific to my foundations and trajectory of creating the work that I've made, and also to my upbringing and to where creating work in public spaces on walls has led me, but also what it means to me. I've grown up here in New Mexico most of my life, also on the Navajo Nation. And I started making work as a graffiti artist, which is also how I met Ket. Ket is a longtime friend. I've also admired his work for many, many years, even before we ever met, and was an inspiration to me as a young artist, as a young graffiti artist. He is taken this movement and the recognition of this movement to great lengths, and is the co-founder of the first Museum of Graffiti, which is in Wynwood, and is also a historian, an archivist, a practicing artist, a curator. What else?
Troublemaker.
Father.
Father.
Devil's advocate. All the things. So thank you everyone here for being here. And this is a very special talk, I feel like, and really rooted in the foundations. So thank you for being here for this talk I haven't done before.
Well, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I haven't been in Santa Fe for a while, and it's been some time since Nani and I have gotten to hang out, and so this is a treat for me as much as it is, I think, for you. And so let's get into it, Nani.
Yep.
And so in our conversations, Nani, you know, we walk through the exhibition, which is it's so amazing of an exhibition. It's an inside joke. Everybody always says it's amazing. Well, everything is amazing. But it is actually amazing and fabulous, and really a joy to witness Nani's transformation over the past few decades, and seeing the show here really, to me, brings me a lot of personal joy. So I really hope you get to see it. But Nani, you weren't always exhibiting in fancy museums. I think quite the contrary. You're more, the way that I know you is more working outside and more in sort of this sort of mischievous way. What are your, how'd you get into being such a mischievous young person?
Yeah, I started, so I grew up here. I grew up here in New Mexico, and before this time of me being an artist, I didn't really do anything that was art related. I wasn't a talented drawer. I didn't do anything. I grew up on the west side of Albuquerque in a place called Corrales. It's pretty, there's a mesa, there's a lot of farmland. Aside from that is me growing up on the res out in Chinle, Arizona. Also another sprawling, large landscape. And I think mostly I was like an explorer, you know? I would kind of go around and check things out and catch lizards, and you know, I really had this idyllic childhood. I got to be in landscapes. I got to see beautiful desert landscapes. And both of those places lended to that. And when I was 15, I really got immersed in subcultures. I got really into music. I got really into punk rock. Got really into hip hop. Started trying to find my community, who was also a part of, into listening to those music genres, and found like the skateboarding community and this is in when I was, you know, about 12 12 or so, 12, 13. And part of the skateboarding culture here, which I think is really interesting, is we would go down, or at least through this group of friends that I had, they would go down to the arroyos. So those of you who are from New Mexico totally know what an arroyo is. Those of you who are not, and specifically in Albuquerque, they are the drainage diversions that happen from the west side all the way up from the east side to the mountains, and it diverts all of the water, all of the rainfall shed into the river. And so it's these long stretches of concrete canals that go all over the city. And my friends would go down there to skate them. They would go down there and just, you know, they were huge playgrounds, really. It was concrete playgrounds. You're not supposed to do this. There was like big campaigns like the Ditch Witch, and, you know, like you'll die, and sometimes you saw people die, you know, sometimes you saw people get swept away. So not condoning this in any shape or form.
I'll condone it.
Is my PSA. But yeah, I would go down there with my friends and check this out. And this is what they look like. These photos actually are from about the time that I was actually down there. And we would, you know, to me it was, I wasn't even thinking, I mean, the rebellious side started by going down there anyway. Like, that was the rebellious side. The rebellious side started with music. A friend and mine were laughing because at the time in the early 90s, remember there was the campaigns, the like conservative Bush campaigns of parental advisory, explicit lyrics, you know, like you'd get in trouble for wearing like a Motley Crue t-shirt with a pentagram on it or something, you know, you get sent home. And so like that was already a rebellious.
Tipper Gore.
Yeah, Tipper Gore, that's right.
Can't forget Tipper Gore.
Yeah, so the rebellious started with that. And when I went down there and started seeing these, to me, that spark was really the juxtaposition of just seeing something I had never seen before and something that was continually changing. These felt alive. Looking at art that was just every time we went down there, it was like something different, something new to see. And it was familiar in the sense that I was seeing it in hip-hop culture. I was seeing it in urban cultures. I was seeing it in the backdrop of like, you know, Blondie videos and, you know, all of these like in New York or videos that I'd see. And it was just like so appealing and so like something that wasn't a part of my landscape that I had seen. And yeah, I felt like I discovered it, you know, like I was privy to something, you know, something different. And I wanted to learn it. I wanted to do it. And I didn't think about it being illegal. I didn't think about it being something I wasn't supposed to do. I just thought that it was something I wanted to do.
What did your parents think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that was the other side of it is, you know, my parents didn't like it. I didn't tell them. Let's start there. I didn't tell them. Yeah, I didn't tell them. And I think that needs to exist. Ket and I have talked a lot about this movement being very significant because it is an art movement that has been started by children. And it has this global capacity. And there is a very strong element of, I think, kids maybe holding something sacred, you know, being able to hold and have a place where they make art aside from what their parents
It's
do
their
or
own,
think.
right? It's something that's our own. It's something that is, I'm always fascinated by knowing that this started off with children and teenagers, and it's maybe the only art form that's done that. It's survived 50 years, and so for those of you that don't know, I mean, the impulse to write on a wall is It's very old. Everybody does it. It's, if you go into the catacombs, you'll see writings going back 200 years. And it's just something that humans do, yet we get in trouble for it, which is pretty odd. And so, to me, the art form that we're talking about, that we sort of have this shared bond over, is one that is in urban cities, started by teenagers that are precocious and mischievous and bored, and want to get away from what their parents are into. And there's a lot of discovery and exploration and freedom in going out and discovering places like this, which looks like a really cool place. I'd like to go there and paint myself. But we find these places that are safe for us. It's sort of, it might be dangerous for adults, but they're safe for us because we're the only ones that are there, and we're not going to get in trouble because adults don't want to go in there. And so that's one of the magical things about being a teenager or a kid that discovers this movement, is you find these safe havens where it's okay to be rebellious and mischievous and explore, or a terrible artist, or a beginner. It's okay. It's a practice place. It's a playground. And we sort of seek these places out as sort of the safe haven for exploration of ourselves and of our own identity and paint making. And I think it's very important to have those places, and kids, no matter how many adults show up that are really conservative or square, and try to remove these places or paint them over 1,000,000 times, teenagers will find another place. It might be an abandoned warehouse. It might be, the side of the train tracks. Places that adults don't like to go is where teenagers like to practice this the most, or where we like to practice the most, because now we're sort of forever some of us are forever teenagers and keep at it. And so I love that you discovered that and felt this sort of connection to it, because not everybody wants to disobey their parents, and not everybody wants to, as kids, they're like the goody two-shoes don't want to do that. And so I like that you had this sort of spirit.
It was an impulse. I think it started with an impulse, and then finding, and this is probably the appeal, I think, for a lot of writers, is then finding a community. So I attribute a lot of the skill that I have had as an artist to this practice first. Before then, as I had mentioned, I wasn't formally trained. I wasn't, a genius child prodigy, painting figures and things like that. I wasn't even interested in it. It was the recognition of space, maybe this idea of being young, but being able to take something, to have something that was mine, to be able to write my name on something, to take back that space, and then to have that recognition in a community amongst my peers, and share that celebration, share that shit talking about other people. I don't know. Share those little experiences with one another. Read a language, understand and have a shared language between each other. And for me, that was very impactful.
And it's something that adults don't really know about, or didn't know about at the time, right? Or most didn't, and so it was your own.
Yeah.
It was for your generation. It was for your age group, so to speak. But that doesn't mean that there weren't rules and that there wasn't learning in it. And from what you're showing now, you decided to go and really do graffiti, not the kind of graffiti that you just do for one summer and then stop. You got fully invested in it. What about this type of graffiti that we're seeing here? Sort of wild style graffiti or style writing, where you're bending letters and shaping them, trying to make the best fonts. What got you into this side of it?
Yeah, there's something very appealing, I think, not being under the pressure of having to draw a thing. you know, like not having to draw a flower and make it look like a flower, because that was something I definitely didn't know how to do. What I did learn how to do is how to write my name. We all learn how to write our name. I knew how to do that, you know, from when I was 5. And then, you know, I felt like graffiti started with this very, like, rudimentary principle within the line and understanding the line. And I'm obsessed with the line. The line is, to me, the line is poetry. It's still poetry. It doesn't, I always say to students, the line doesn't lie. You know, you can't lie a line. You know, it is what it is. You're going to see it. And I started there, and I think, you know, at the time, you know, there's this kind of progression, I think, at the time of doing this, because there wasn't a lot of like, you were looking at it in space. You were looking at it in real time all the time. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't this opportunity to, I mean, out here in the Southwest, there wasn't even really magazines. It was so precious if you saw a graffiti magazine. Like, I saw graffiti magazines that Ket put out. And it was like, oh my God, you know? Yeah, it's like, oh my God, this like traveled so far from New York. We didn't see that kind of stuff. So you were seeing everything in real time. And I didn't understand how people got to this phase. So it started out with tagging, went into making more developed letters. And I think every side of it, I was just invested in trying to do more and more and more. And all of this was happening in the space that I was working in, which is one of the beautiful things that I think a lot of people don't understand about the high levels that people work at as graffiti writers. And definitely Ket has, like, you know, gone, you know, and painted trains, painted subways in the dark. You know, that you're thinking on all of these levels simultaneously in real time on a real surface. And so the challenge is happening so quick. And yeah, I think each challenge kind of brought on a new challenge. And writers do that. I think that the capacity for learning in that way is multiplied very quickly, because also it's public. So you see, you're like, everyone's going to see that.
All your mistakes.
All your mistakes. All your mistakes tomorrow, you know.
and then talk about it.
And talk about it or celebrate it. So, and then you have the other side of it, of the public, and that was always an interesting thing for me too, is because it made me very much aware of not just my small community of writers or peers, but also that, like, the larger group of everybody else in the city was also paying attention. And, you know, at the time, for me, it's very interesting to have this conversation right now, because graffiti has moved into a place of celebration. And I think it's moved into a place of acceptance. But at this moment in time, it wasn't necessarily an accepted action or an accepted art. It was something that people, like you had said earlier, like people feared it, you know?
Looked down upon it, dismissed it. I mean, you wouldn't ever tell anybody that you did this. It was something that was really taboo, and you wouldn't share. You had to sort of have a double identity, right? You had to sort of hide it and never really share. You know, even from your family. You know, especially from your family, from your teachers, they would rat you out. You'd maybe get arrested as a result, or in some kind of trouble, or maybe not allowed to leave your house. They'd lock you in, so you wouldn't go and paint. And so it's come a long way in many places. I think that as adults, we also forget that the kids that are out tagging right now, they're also not really loved, you know, as much as we celebrate the masterfully done graffiti. The kids that are just starting out that are tagging, that's still seen as pretty taboo, even though Some of us might appreciate it because we sort of understand the arc that these young people or these beginners might have. But most people, it's just, many people see it as a nuisance. And so you went from maybe being a bit of a nuisance to then being, what you're seeing up there on the screen is a quite masterful rendition of lettering with the connections and the curls and the extensions. And so for some people might be able to read it, some people might not be able to read it because it's its own language. You sort of found and discovered your own style. And, I would imagine that took you a very long time to master.
Yeah, I devoted, all in all, about 10 years before I went into doing any other forms of art. And I just focused on graffiti. And like I said, this is very like I think now you speak about like leading a double life. And that's something I feel like I've done my entire life. Like, at least not my entire life. There was the time before I did any of this that I was just myself. But after then, it seems like there's always been a double life element. And I think that even carries on going into the art world. And choosing to do public artwork and then trying to find a space for that in institutions and galleries and museums. Trying to combine those worlds, trying to combine the world that's for the public, trying to be inclusive of environments, of people in very secluded, and then also working within very secluded, maybe elitist spaces. And all the time kind of like working outside of the box. And like earlier, I'm going to allude to, we've been talking, of course, because like it's just wonderful to talk to Ket. But you had said something earlier that was like, tagging on the surface for kids is like the outlet that we have to think outside the box, to like really bring our thinking for everybody. So not only for the child or the teenager, the whoever, even the adult that's doing it to get outside of their mindset and do something that's disruptive, but also for everybody else that encounters that. That it's like that one opportunity, it's like that glitch in the system, that glitch in the status quo, in the grid or wherever we want to see that, in the sidewalk, that we get to experience. So those movements, I think, are that's what has made them very, very impactful. And
we need rebels. Society needs rebels. Whether it's on a small level as a tag that's going to sort of jar you when you wake up in the morning because you didn't want it on your business, or maybe it's not just that it's there, but what it says. Maybe it's a message. Maybe it's more than a name. And so I think that, from my perspective and what I've seen, we need that. Society needs that, to get pushed a little bit. Otherwise, we might just be a world of accountants or something. Something totally boring, except that we need accountants too. But we don't need everybody to be an accountant, right? And so we want, and society needs to sort of break it. Otherwise, who knows where we'll be. And so you, as this sort of rebellious person, and maybe not even so rebellious because you ended up adopting these norms of graffiti, and you found this community, and then you were accepted and received. You, I guess, maybe I would say, maybe rebelled out of that, or moved just beyond that, and started painting murals, and not little tiny baby murals, but like gigantic, I own the city murals. How'd you, why, and how dare you?
Yeah. I had transitioned out of, there is like a gap in the timeline. It wasn't like I just went from graffiti into, and I'm going to skip ahead because I maybe put these a little bit out of order, but I didn't just go from doing graffiti and then painting a mural or portrait of somebody on a wall. In that time, I had ended doing graffiti around the time I got pregnant and had my son. It was just a very, very transitional moment, I think, for me as like a woman and just in my life. Of course, just also like not being able to like climb on top of a roof. 7 months pregnant, whatever. I don't know. Yeah,
It's true.
I don't know. Yeah, it'd be very hard. So jump a fence. So I didn't do it. I just stopped completely. I didn't do anything. At the time, though, I was my partner, my son's dad, was also a graffiti writer. Was also a tattoo artist. He had been practicing tattoo art. We had this very immersive community of artists, and it's interesting because we have been talking about the layers of subcultures and how those subcultures kind of facilitated I want to say like self-learning or maybe peer learning. I kind of don't like the idea of self-taught, like the self-taught artist. I don't necessarily think I was self-taught because I don't know how you teach yourself, but I was self-learned.
Isn't it a bit of like this informal learning that's happening amongst friends and peers? And so maybe it's like informal mentorship, right? You're just hanging around and you're soaking it up, and you're exchanging ideas and maybe even exchanging drawings and work, and you kind of were in a very sort of, I personally, as an outsider, knowing the group of artists that you were in, you were kind of in a very special, magical place because everybody was so talented.
Yeah, there was a lot of I think like in the tattoo world, there was a lot of artists that were constantly making work every day. Everybody that I knew who was making work, whether they were graffiti artists, whether they were tattoo artists, whether they were an illustrator, you know, some people were making stuff for like kind of graphic design stuff. Everybody was doing something every day. So I was in these very kind of like high momentum communities that people were very motivated. They were very interested, very into, you know, putting out new ideas, talking about ideas. And it didn't feel different. That was the same thing that writers did. I mean, every day we're like graffiti writers, as part of like hanging out, you just sit there and you draw, you know, and you trade drawings, and you look at things, and then you go out and you make it. And you know, you make it together, and then you look at it again, and you know, it's just like all of these things, like critiquing, discipline, learning an ethic, all of these things were happening around me. And when I got pregnant, it was really just about transitioning that same ethic, that same work mode, that same obsession into just something else that I could do at home. And so I started trying to learn how to draw, and I started painting and trying to do figurative stuff. I got very much interested in illustration, like turn of the century illustration. So like illustration from the 50s and like from the 30s. And that was like another really big source of inspiration. And I think I got really into it because I liked the fonts. I loved all of these, like, to me they were like lettermaster, you know, and I would just like, you know, find this beautiful sketch by like J.C. Leyendecker, and it would just be these beautiful lines and curls and, you know, all of this stuff happening, and it would have this beautiful kind of composition. And I was blown away. I was like, I couldn't figure it out. And so I started trying to mimic that and just the overall shape. And I think the thing that I didn't like or I didn't see was brown people. Brown people in that imagery. It was like if you just took a snapshot of advertising from turn of the century to the 50s, it's like no brown people existed, except like in very romanticized situations. So I started making similar illustrations, but with brown people, with indigenous people, with Chicanas, with Chola-looking, women instead of, whatever, Susie Homemaker. And aside from that, is expanding my painting kind of capabilities, I also got into, like, following the trajectory of letters, started learning sign painting, and took on an apprenticeship with a sign painter, Leopoldo Romero, and he started learning to also think about lettering in a more like supercomposed format, and also how that works in the scheme of things of looking at a wall and presentation. And this photo here is me and Leopoldo working on one of the first murals that I created. That was out here at the Museum of Native Contemporary Art downtown, the IAIA Museum. And yeah, this was all one shot. I had learned to use different kinds of paint. Started just kind of expanding out.
And I would imagine it's all new tools. You had to really start to adapt to this new form of painting.
Tools, but also like there was so much kind of beauty, and I think one thing that also like kind of carries over into graffiti is like this idea of like being very clean, like not like you don't do drips and like
very neat.
Yeah, it's
very refined.
And the better you are at that, the like more skill you have, the more you can make spray paint not look like spray paint is like an asset. And yeah, being able to make very crisp, clean decisions. And I found a lot of overlap in these two practices, also like understanding color. So much of the way that I learned was really all about being able to put something on a wall, how color worked on a wall. Nothing was different from learning about signage. Leopoldo would, wax poetic about sign color schemes, and being able to read something from 100 feet away.
The yellows and the blacks, or the yellows and the reds.
Yeah.
The light blues.
Yep, all of it. And it was interesting because I think later on, in learning color theory and hearing about color theory, it's like, oh yeah, totally. Put an outline on, put some highlights, make it pop, do things so that way it can really manipulate that field of vision. And all of that was interesting. All of that played into the way that I learned to create art.
So what you're saying is that you're going from graffiti into sign painting into mural, and you're really aware of the public witnessing and seeing your work. You want them to see it. You want it to be sort of visible, right? You learn all these tricks as a graffiti artist and then as a sign painter. And so, for me, when we were talking about your first mural, you see that in there. You see that and more. And you see sort of an approach to painting a wall that has the sign painting. It has some sort of a grandiosity with the scale and the approach, but it's also a bit unconventional.
Yeah, this is the first mural that I had ever created. There was, I think the biggest transition for myself coming out of graffiti and doing murals, kind of with all of those things in mind, was that there was a lot of freedom and resource to creating a mural. And it was a freedom and a resource that I had never encountered before. It wasn't like this commission thing from a store that I had to like very much abide to what they were doing. It wasn't like this graffiti thing where you're working at night, you're working under stress, under pressure, maybe illegally or legally, whatever. There was a lift involved that they were willing to give me, and they were willing to pay me for it. And they were like, what space would you like? And I was just like, all of it. I want all of it. This is what I've always wanted, is all of it. But really started kind of seeing the relationship between imagery and the spaces that they live. The way that imagery can have a relationship with buildings. And then the relationship with the people around them. And I started out first wanting to create something I had never seen before, something that I've always wanted to see, and that is the representation of Indigenous people from and by Indigenous people. Like I said, I'm looking at all of these magazines from like mid to early, century, and only representations I saw were like highly romanticized ones, inaccurate ones, or ones that were in so far of a like archaic past that it wasn't anything I identified with. So what I did identify with within my own cultures is our philosophies, our teachings, and finding them highly relevant for today. So I wanted to create something that was all of that. And this piece, I think, for me, still becomes, I think it's one of my favorite pieces. And it's the first one that I made because it was just like this like big exhale. It was something I've always had wanted to make, even though I didn't know it. But when I made it, I was like, this feels good. This feels right. And it brought together all of these tools that I had learned. Like this piece was created with spray paint, it's created with one shot, it was created with house paint. Some of it was brush painted, some of it was spray painted, some of it was, put on there, and some of it was freestyled, some of it was gridded on there, some of it, it was just like all the tools came out. So many different, working between surfaces. Surfaces is such a big thing that I respect. Graffiti art, definitely working, you don't have a choice, you're kind of at the mercy of whatever surface is there. There can be a standpipe or, conduits in the way, and you figure it out. You don't have the choice to say, that's not going to work. It's got to work. This kind of spans 3 different wall textures. And yeah, so it was really, really interesting to start to create work this way. There was a lot of freedom in it. And at the same time, it really felt like, if I could convey these large ideas, it wasn't as important to put myself in it, to put my name in it, to put my tag in it. I don't sign any murals now at all. I never sign murals. Sometimes people ask me to like write a little credit line, and they ask me to do that, but I don't feel the need to like put a signature. The signature is the piece itself.
So you have this mural practice. You jump into it, decide to take over Albuquerque and New Mexico. Big murals everywhere. You don't just sort of do it in the graffiti way, the kind of the way that I'm describing, just taking over space, which we love to do and not ask anybody for permission. You ask for permission, you engage the public, you develop a social practice, a community practice. Why?
Yeah, there seemed to feel this need to share this agency. This whole time, I think the most important thing that graffiti, that painting in public spaces, that painting on walls, taking up space, was it empowered my agency as a young woman. Even though you're secret doing some of that, there is something very empowering about seeing yourself and knowing you did that. And seeing yourself in a space that doesn't recognize you in any other way. But knowing that you did that. And I felt the need that when I had this resource, I really feel like painting murals for me a lot is just capitalizing on the resource of being able to create this work, and also holding to the ethics that if I'm going to create this work, that I really want it to be something that's shared, that it can't just be me. I did that. I put my name on things. I claimed that space back. Now it was like what I was more interested in was that conversation of working back and forth, being able to create something, to learn something. Maybe it's not about peer learning now, it's about community learning. Being invited into spaces that I had never been in before, and recognizing that the people who are there are going to have to live with this work, going to have to live with this that's on the wall. But what can it bring? How can it be in conversation with the landscape? How can it be in conversation with the landscape, with the community, with the people, with the ideas, with the things that are happening in that time and space? So I had shifted to a community practice and being inclusive of the spaces that I was in, to create something that also I would learn from and that I had never seen. And I think that there is, I have to recognize, and I feel like there is a large part of creating work in public spaces, whether that's graffiti, mural, street art, whatever, that's revolutionary. And to me, that's very interesting. I think that's very interesting to be able to do, because other than art, other than seeing that, like the only thing that we see in public spaces on the majority is advertising. And that in itself is like, we're not in control of that. That's meant for us to absorb, to consume, Sorry, I should move this over and keep touching it. So there is this revolutionary aspect, and I think that that's very interesting. And I would love to hear your thoughts and point of view on like on what you feel is the most why street art, why murals are such a revolutionary aspect right now, and how they continue to be.
Sure. I mean, I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. It's so critical to have this sort of counterbalance in the world and visually, and that isn't just advertising. I mean, how much advertising can we consume? I don't even know how many times we've seen an ad a day anymore. Thousands of times, perhaps. It's now not just out in the street. It's coming through your phone. You're getting texted ads. It's like there is this, AI. I'm scared of AI. AI is going to, they're selling you stuff before you even think that you need to buy it. And so we live in this hyper commercial, hyper consumer driven existence right now. It's pretty disgusting. It's all about buying and selling things. And so the most revolutionary thing in this is that we're not selling anything. It's just art. It's just ideas. It's just beauty, or the sharing. And the people that do this could very well be creative directors at advertising companies selling more junk. They could be selling cars or whatever it is. You could be doing that. These illustrations could be, for Toyota up the block or whatever. But you chose a harder path. That's the big money path, by the way. You can change now if you want.
Right. And if I did that path, I wouldn't have the opportunity to work with people. If advertising, if like these systems probably were more inclusive of communities, of people with struggles, with what we're actually facing on the day-to-day, with revolutionary aspects. I do work with some groups, but they're grassroots organizations, a lot of environmental groups, women's rights groups. Youth, I think we have a tremendous amount of knowledge to learn from young people, because they have a freedom that we somehow like forgot about, you know, and I think that's incredibly beautiful and amazing, and they just say things sometimes that are so free, that in time, you know, we forget about that because we're stressed out about bills or the status quo or whatever might exist.
I think the revolutionary thing about this direction that you're taking, and so many artists that were, you know, I'm going to isolate it to the graffiti art movement, is that they've seen themselves as outsiders. They see themselves, or we see ourselves as outsiders, or sort of on the fringe, and we take some chances, and have decided to sort of live sort of this counterculture lifestyle that's not normal for most people. Whether it's to go and become a muralist, or it's to become a tattoo artist, or to go and even just to be a painter. You know, most people don't want to be painters. It's no guarantee that you're going to have success to be a painter. It's actually a really hard road to take. And so seeing graffiti artists or writers that have been normally, you know, on the fringes decide to come in and sort of claim their place to me is a very revolutionary and bold act. But I think that we've sort of realized that as we take over space as young people, that there's room for us to be bold, that there can be room for us. And so some of my favorite murals, yours and other muralists, are ones that are former graffiti artists and that also have developed a social practice, that have decided they've matured enough and they've worked enough in the street that they're not scared to go into communities or be a part of a community. I mean, that's a pretty bold thing, to open yourself up, to change your work. And I love that, and I see it in your work and in other artists' work, and not everybody wants to do that. And so to me, that's a really sort of very specific part of your work that I think really makes you different than most of the graffiti writers that go into the world to do public work. And so it's and I'm sure it's quite challenging.
Yeah, it's not.
It's not for everybody.
It's not for everybody. I mean, not everyone can do everything. For me, it's interesting because, like I said, I found my voice. I found my agency as a young person, as a woman, through these risks that I took, and putting myself in these positions to learn. And in that, I gained a lot. I gained community. I gained a way to exchange. I gained confidence. I gained so much stuff. And I think for me, when I started moving into creating murals and realizing that there was so much more out there that could be said that I can't say. I had already kind of done the things that I wanted to say. I had already, you know, wrote my name 1,000 times. You know, I'd already asserted who I was in my environment, and it was more interesting for me to find ways to assert other people's voice in that environment, and to work with them, and at the same time, in tandem, learn something that would. I mean, for me, there's a lot of process. There's a lot of process in creating community engaged work, and it's very different. There's so many layers of, I think, wall art. I think in our conversations we've agreed it's all necessary. It's all beautiful in some kind of capacity, shape, and form. The place that I'm at now is sharing this process and this ability, this agency with people who may not actually be like artistically inclined. And it for me, I still see the value in their work, their ideas, their presence being in a public space. Because when it's in a public space, it can create an exchange. Then you're creating that exchange, that idea, it continues on and it lives. Walls live. Walls are alive. Like our communities, everything is alive. And it has a beginning, a middle, and it even has an end. And I think being able to share that span of its life with other people is very important to me, and it nourishes me to keep continuing on and making work.
You've given yourself, it's a service. You're a vehicle, in a way. You know, you're it's a lot. You're very much deciding to be a tool for whatever community that you're going into work, and I think that that's an amazing thing. It's so amazing. You're so amazing. It's such a cool thing to be able to do, to be able to give yourself in that way, and to receive what you know, the benefit of that exposure, or opening yourself up to whatever you're going to get from the people that you get to meet. Each wall becomes sort of a journey and its own experience that, you know, as much as you're giving it or being part of this creation process, you're also getting, like you said, getting nurtured by the people that you get to collaborate, and sometimes, and who knows who you meet on these walls. So I think it's a pretty radical idea, but really rooted in something very special, and you know, loving. You know, you're doing it because you have a lot of love to sort of share and also to receive. So I think that's pretty radical in and of itself. So what happens when these murals disappear? How do you feel that, you know, you said that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. So what happens when they disappear? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean,
we talked about this a little bit, right? Like here today, gone tomorrow, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that, you know, it was almost like that was a training in it, like a part of the training from the beginning, because graffiti is highly ephemeral. It's highly ephemeral. These photographs that I showed you at the beginning are like very precious, and I didn't know that at the time. And I thank Carlos and Joseph for helping me put together some of those photographs, because you're not, at the time you weren't thinking of any of that. You weren't thinking about documenting, you weren't thinking about putting these spaces. You thought about taking a photo of your piece because you knew that it could be, if you didn't do it then, it could be gone. It was going to be gone forever. And I've never been attached to the work once it's created. I think once it's created, it's living and it's there, and whoever encounters it is, they were meant to see it. Just like I was maybe meant to see all of the things that I saw at the times that I saw them. I hope these don't last. I hope buildings don't last. I hope cities don't last. I hope it all crumbles. I hope it's all destroyed. I hope it goes back into the ground and it's, vanished.
This is punk rock. This is punk rock.
And that's the end. Just kidding. No. Good night, everybody. Thank you. No. Yeah. I don't have an attachment. For me, I think part of the process, being able to create this work, is about the exchange. Having a genuine exchange and creating art out of it, continuing on this language.
I'm highly attached. I don't want it to crumble. I don't want it to end. Not at all.
And I'm very much inspired by musicians. I'm very much inspired by music. And I think, you have to hear music at the time that it's played. You have to hear music live. You have to participate in going to shows and seeing the performance. And that moment is cosmic in a way. It changes you. At the same time, creating this work, being at that moment, having those exchanges with people, with communities, creating an art out of it, that's the piece. Thereafter, each time each person sees that, gets to interact with it. That's also maybe the performance. That's also the exchange that strangers get to see when they get to see something on a wall.
Different than Instagram.
Yes, don't look at any of this on Instagram. Bringing it back to the show was a very beautiful component that I was happy that they included in this exhibition was a map. It was a map and a locator to find the actual pieces to exchange, be a part of that. Part of being present in art is just that, taking the time out to look at things in real life, and I think that that's something very precious.
You get to experience the scale of it, the majesty of the work.
Yes.
I think it's so important to see in person.
And I think we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you, Ket, because I really feel so privileged to be in this conversation with you, and also where you are at with the Museum of Graffiti. And I think now is an interesting time that we're all witnessing here. And I think it's this recognition of this movement that we've talked about, this movement that was started by kids, the progression and the trajectory of that, kind of breaking off into so many facets, going into so many areas of the world, and then being recognized into institutions and into museums. And I want to ask you, what is your hope for this recognition in having a museum, in having this global kind of movement that we're all captivated by?
Sure. So for me, we have a lot of things in common. I think what we don't have in common is I don't want to see it all crumble. I want to preserve it. I want to have photos of it. I want to have the videotape. I want to have the audio recording. I want to use it to teach people about what I think is a very important art movement, like you said, created by youth, that has been dismissed for so long. I opened the Museum of Graffiti about 3 years ago because no one else has done it, because I wanted to just do it. We're kind of crazy like that. We'll just do it, and I'm into it, and just rolled up my sleeves and got to work. And so the work that I do and is preserving this art form, and sort of the reason is that I think it's important, and that I believe that all these artists need to be celebrated. They need to be known. They don't need to be unknown. And so the fact that you have an exhibition here in this museum is a big deal. It's not lost on me. I hope it's not lost on you or on any of you. And so normally artists that come from the streets don't make it into these places. They're not let in. They're not noticed. And so she had to paint over 50, 100 murals, I don't know how many murals before anybody noticed, to give her a solo show. And so I'm trying to speed that process up. I'm trying to celebrate people that haven't been noticed, that haven't been recognized. Many of them now that unfortunately our friends have passed away before they received the recognition. And so building a museum, I have 50 years of people to talk about. And it's a lot of work, but I also want to talk about living artists. And so my job that I've decided to take on is to speed up that conversation, speed up the recognition, speed up the acceptance, those conversations, so that artists that decide to be rebellious and come from the streets, quote unquote, also are part of a conversation while they're alive, so that they can maybe sell their work, so that they maybe can have a modest living or be a working artist. And so for me, that's my sort of my goal, and that's the goal of the museum, is to sort of share the way that we have this conversation here today, share thousands of these conversations, and share the stories of these tens of thousands of artists around the world that are worth knowing and that are worth celebrating and that are worth just, exhibiting. And so luckily, I opened the museum, and lo and behold, people come to the museum. We get visitors every day, and it's a museum not as fancy as this museum maybe one day, but you come in and you read the plaques and you read the text on the wall and you see the pieces on the wall, and I'm a bit of a detective, so I'm always hunting for these pictures, like the ones of the tags from the 90s here in Albuquerque and the ones from the 70s in New York and the Bronx, and we enlarge those images and find all this stuff, and we have these conversations about all this stuff, the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the innovators, the rule breakers, the troublemakers, the stylists, and yeah, I think it's important work to do. I wish someone else would do it because it's so much work. I hope that there's many other museums around the world that also take on the opportunity and the work to share artists from this art form. And so the artists from this art form, like you don't paint graffiti anymore. The work that you do that's in this exhibition, it's wonderful, and we celebrate it and we experience it. But you went in that way. And so the artists from our movement, sure, when they were very young, they did graffiti, but they've gone into so many different directions. It's amazing, and so amazing. It's wonderful, different styles, and so we just sort of bring them all together and show that this sort of teenage art form, when you go through it, just has an incredible trajectory, and you just don't know where it is. And so I think we help a lot of people sort of understand that it's okay to doodle, it's okay to write on the wall. We actually even teach kids. We have kids drawing classes, and parents actually bring their kids to learn how to do graffiti, which is wild. We're teaching 5- and 6-year-olds how to do graffiti. I can't wait till they get some spray cans in their hands. So yeah, so that's kind of how I see my work and the value of having a museum for an ephemeral art form, which to me, I like that it's ephemeral, but I also wish it wasn't ephemeral. I'd rather you not paint over it. Find another wall, do something else with the city's resources other than cleaning off the graffiti. Maybe put it into education or, something else. So, and I change over time, in my understanding as I deal with more people and more artists and more of the public. But yeah, Nani, thank you so much for the question and everybody for being here today with us to talk about all these
I love
things.
that, and yeah, thank you for bringing that. I felt that's such an important piece to be said, because we're really witnessing kind of this movement coming full circle, and it coming into the recognition that it deserves, and there being spaces that kind of lend to this discourse, lend to this recognition, lend to this preservation of something that taught me how to be an artist. So yeah, thank you. And if you guys have any questions, we'll open up the floor to that.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak to what seems to be distinctive about public art, right? Publicly created art is how it incorporates all the various art forms, visual art, literary art, performing art, right? I mean, when it's being created, that's almost like a dance, right? And so I was just wondering if you could speak to the process, if there are subgenres of this art that are recognized universally, or that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
It makes a little bit of sense to me. I think that when so many artists that work in the public space there's so many personalities and so many sort of paths that artists have taken, and so the artists that like to paint murals have to have, it's almost a performance. You're out there every day, and so you have to be very patient. You're dealing with the public all the time, and so there's sort of that type of an artist. There's the artists that are more of the that are still working in the public that are postering. they're creating work in the studio, and they're postering, and they're leaving the art behind everywhere. And so they're less inclined to deal with the public, and they don't want to necessarily have those conversations. And so it's less of a performance, it's more of a messaging, you know. And then there's artists that are just, you know, very invisible, that are just maybe speaking to a different group. They're maybe not speaking to you, maybe they're speaking to their peers. And so I think that there's, depending on the city, you have all these people coming together. Sometimes they're actually all working in the same space. Sometimes they're battling each other, and they're destroying each other's work because the space is limited. And so to me, I think it's fascinating because it's changing. Every year it's different. You know, let's say in Miami right now, where I currently live, you know, 10 years ago, there was a lot of activity in the streets. There were a lot of artists that were doing posters. There were a lot of stencil artists. There were a lot of graffiti artists, and there were muralists. Now, there are no stencil artists. They're basically gone. There are no poster artists. They're basically gone. The posters are now only advertising. There were never advertising posters, but the muralists are still there, and the taggers and the graffiti artists are there. So it changes from time to time. And so I don't know if I'm quite answering your question.
Yeah, I was just mainly, the main thing that made me think of the question was the incorporation of poetry.
It's out there too.
Yeah,
I see it too.
Seems like so much of it is both visual poetry and, you know, literary poetry.
There-
Actual characters. That's poetic.
Well, there's that, but there's also actually people that are writing poems on walls.
Right.
I see that on walls. I have photos of them. It's always odd when I see a street poet in that way, you know. And so I find it fascinating that they want to sit there and write their poem. But the streets are really great for communication. They're really great for sharing ideas, right? Think about it's free.
Right. That's poetry in and of itself.
Yeah. But so thank you for the question.
I have a couple questions. So, question for both of you. What did you write? Why did you pick that name? And were you ever a part of a crew?
Yeah, so I wrote Cupid. Why I picked that name, I was telling the story to Ket. It's kind of funny. I'm a bit of an insomniac. I'm a bit of a late night worker, night owl. And I used to write a name called Blink, and I just picked that. I don't even know why I picked it. I just was like, this is good enough. I don't know. I kind of wasn't attached to it. I did want something a little bit different. It was also kind of an awkward thing once I actually started doing it, to find a flow in it. And I was drawing late at night, and the TV was on, and Star Trek was on, and there's a character in Star Trek called Q. He's like, I think he's that real pale guy.
This is kind of like Star Trek music.
Yeah, this is a good segue into the story, and yeah, the name of the episode was Cupid, and so I was just like, you know, loosely looking at this thing and doodling, and really big on the screen, it just flashed Cupid in capital letters, and I was like, whoa, that's cool, you know? And I liked it. I liked the way it looked. I liked the form of it, and I thought it was cute, you know? It was feminine, and it was interesting to me. I never thought about that word being written like that. It looked very graffiti to me, just seeing it, you know, like this different way of writing something. So I started fooling around with that. Q's were difficult, kind of awkward too, but
So you
figured
wrote
it out.
Cupid, Q-P-I-D.
Yeah. So yeah, it came from Star Trek. I'm not a Star Trek fan. It may have been the only Star Trek episode that I've ever really looked at. And what was your other question?
Cruise.
Crews. You know what? Crews are interesting. I didn't paint with too many crews. It was hard. I painted one of my, old time partners and person I painted with a lot is here, Shug. My partner for a long time during that period was also a graffiti writer, but it was my son's dad. But it was also very hard to not feel tokenized as a woman in kind of this like guys club. So in a weird way, I made a lot of choices to paint alone because I wanted to stand out for like my style and for the spaces that I was choosing to paint in. I wanted to find that I wanted people to see that. I kind of didn't want to attribute it to a mass, even though that's a very important part of the whole culture as a crew. But at the time it was really hard to really feel like I was doing this for myself. So I was very selective through the entire time with the people that I chose to paint with. It was a very big trust thing for me, and really finding a few people that I really vibed with. It was less about the crew and the whole like. That's a whole other conversation that can go all over the place. But actually, yeah, I resisted that for a lot of reasons.
So I didn't resist that. I was in a lot of graffiti crews, but there were always crews that were friends for the most part. And so for me, growing up in New York City, crews meant protection. It meant, that you weren't attacked by like whoever, whatever other rival crew or maniacs in the streets. And so I grew up in New York in the 70s and the 80s. And the minute that you left in Brooklyn, the minute you left my apartment, it was dangerous. And so if you were a couple of guys together, it was much safer than one person. I was mugged many times and shot at and held up at knife point and gun point, and eventually, all before 15. And so eventually I got tired of that and got involved in crews and started carrying my own weapons and became the predator, so to speak. And so it's just kind of like part of growing up in those dangerous times. And my graffiti name is Ket, K-E-T, so my name is Alan Ket. It's not my real name. My last name is my graffiti name now. It's sort of the name that I've chosen to go by. And it was just sort of a silly word that we came up in the school lunchroom in high school. I was tired of writing different names that I'd go out the next day and see them on the wall, and it's like every word was taken. And so I finally settled on those 3 letters. And of course, 3 days later, I saw it up on the wall and it was taken. And I decided I wasn't going to change it anymore. And I've outlasted all the other versions of Ket. I've been Ket for 35 years or something like that. And but it's just 3 words, 3 letters rather, and that's basically it.
In terms of, your trajectory from a graffiti artist to a bona fide artist, I guess one could say, is, the difference of you in the street tagging, the difference between, say, like claiming space and reclaiming space, right? Like, I guess, can you say a little bit more about doing that kind of work as an Indigenous woman?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like claiming, like I had to learn to claim space. I had to feel confident in my agency, and build up to that. And then I think at some point it was that like action reaction, right? The initial like just to claim a space was me reacting to what I saw, in a way maybe mimicking in a way, doing something that was just emotion. Reclaiming space, to me, became an act of political defiance. It became an assertion of understanding who I was at that time, what my presence brings to the world, and understanding that it's always belonged to me. And then reclaiming that space and sharing in that reclamation as well. So, yeah.
You talked about the walls growing, and going back to your first mural, how do you feel about graffiti artists adding on to that mural and eventually getting it buffed, or just graffiti artists in general going over murals these days?
Yeah, I hate it, but because part of that like hurts, you know. It never not like, I don't know. There's a part, I think I was even realizing it because Ket was asking me the same question, and like there's that like part of you that just kind of like starts to like get kind of like agitated and like kind of like.
You started to sweat.
I started talking about like violence and like, you know, just being pissed off, and you know, there's part of that, right? But also, you know, that first mural that I did, and it's interesting that you bring that up. It's no longer existing. It's totally like graffitied like crazy. And there was a decision, there was a moment when that piece itself started getting tagged and bombed and gone over, that it was really like defining my purpose of creating it. Was I going to go into that momentum of like defiance, defending, having to defend my work, or do I recognize that as an art form with a lifespan, and that this piece was created for a purpose, and that purpose was completed. If it lasted 100 years, if it lasted a week, it was the purpose was still fulfilled. And I think that's the way that I feel about creating murals. I'm less attached to them emotionally, and I think that took a progression of me, you know, coming from. I've been gone over hundreds of times. I mean, every graffiti thing, it's a miracle, I feel like, if anything is lasting, especially because I haven't kept up with doing anything new. And I think when things do last that long, I think that's very special, you know. I think that is a testament to the life of the community. You know, I think that speaks to that exchange, that speaks to that life, that speaks to that respect, that speaks to that time and moment of what people see and want to keep seeing. So yeah, I'm interested in that. I'm interested in the going over and the preservation just as much as the piece being there. I don't feel the necessity that anything I create has to last forever. Which brings into another thing, at least anything that's in a landscape and that's living out there. I feel like making my work in museums does lend to that opportunity. This is the time and the space for preservation. This is the time. The pieces that I've chosen to create here, of course, are very different from the way that I create murals, and it's very different from the way that I, of course, didn't do anything outside. These pieces have a different context.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for the talk, and it's been really exciting. I don't really know much about the topic, so it's been really new. In one of the murals, there was a part that had windows that looked like they had been painted yellow, and so I was just kind of wondering with that conversation about surfaces. It was the one with the woman and child on her back, and I was just wondering, like, how do windows factor in terms of like part of the design, and then like maybe being a remnant, or maybe being like the sole surface?
I love buildings. I love architecture. I think I always have. I've always loved surfaces. And I mean, I learned to paint on weird surfaces. I learned to paint and incorporate, you know, pipes and, you know, doors and windows and breaks in that. And, you know, painting a freight train, you know, you're looking at, you know, it looks flat, but it's like, you know, it's like you have this depth that you have to compensate for and think about. And I look at this as part of the whole thing. You know, I like to look at the building and the space around it as being integral to the work. I think the building itself has a life. The building itself has its own aesthetic and nostalgia and its own history that I don't necessarily feel like I want to cover that up. I want it to be my work to be in conversation with it. I think it's more interesting that way. And yeah, I mean, and some of those judgments, like a lot on this piece in particular that you're referring to, this piece, the building actually changed like about a week before I painted it. And yeah, so I kind of like retrofitted it. And then some of the judgments, let's see if I can just do this. Like, you know, I had sketched her out, and I even loved the brick as skin tone. And so instead of, like, this wasn't, you know, anything I was like planning on doing, but it just worked, and I went with it as just incorporating, you know, doing the outer limits, highlights, shadows, and contours over skin, but not necessarily filling in the skin and letting it be the brick, because it worked out. And you know, sometimes there's improvisation in spaces. I like that side of it. I think always working on a wall, you improvise. Every surface, every situation is different.
Any other questions, anybody? No? Cool.
All right, thank
so
you
much.
guys. Thank you, everyone.